Good evening, everyone, to this Geo panel. And like all of you know, today is one of the most important days in 2024. And every 4 years, this particular day comes. And why is it important? Very obviously, this is the year of elections, and this is the day when the US elections has been called by almost all particular news networks and almost all major experts. So in that particular eve, we have this particular expert panel with us. We have a very young crowd also on the panel. Here we have Kaitlyn, we have Guzlan, we have Vaibhav, and also we have some experts along with them, Christian, Shuva, and Adnan. So we have a whole power-packed panel, and I'm really happy to see all of you today here. And let us begin. So welcome everyone to the panel. And moving on, US elections have just now been called. Contrary to what we thought, it might take many days to be called. Many of us thought that the result might not come in 2 days, 3 days, definitely after the last US elections in 2020. But this particular US election, we had the results very fast. So, starting first with you, Kaitlyn, because you are currently in ground zero and you are also in a state which is won by Republicans or has now been kept on being winning by Republicans. What is the mood on the ground and what are you particularly feeling? What's your feeling about the elections? And also in the end, if you can describe the elections in one word for me.
Yeah. One word. I don't know if I can manage it in one word, but I'll do my best to answer the questions because this is the first question everybody has been asking me as like, if I'm the first reference point for anybody that, might want to know somebody based in the US. My perception, my answer to the question about what is the mood on the ground is the way that US social life is structured at the moment, it's going to vary from person to person, right? Because I have my certain group of people that I communicate with. I live in the area that I live in. Right now, I'm based in the suburbs in Ohio. And as we know, the suburbs were one of the most contested regions during this election. And I communicate with the people that I communicate with. My perception of reality is going to be very different from the perception of reality of somebody else. What I perceive at the moment, where I'm living and based in my situation, is that there seems to be less tension, in my opinion. But again, this is just from my personal perspective, and it might be completely different from somebody else's perspective. And so far, especially throughout the day yesterday, I was updating the news because I actually voted absentee a few weeks ago. So I was able to have my ballot emailed to me. I sent it in via mail, which is something I'm really grateful for, that the US does offer that opportunity to do absentee and ballots by email. So I was not actually at the polls yesterday. But as I was updating my news and checking to see what happened, it didn't seem like, at least in my area, which is Columbus, Ohio, which, as you said, in the past, it used to be a swing state. But now, for the past few years, it's been voting 100% Republican. It doesn't seem like there was that much tension, or I didn't hear about any, tense events happening at the polling stations in any case. So what I can say about the mood right now is it kind of feels like, all right, let's see how this goes, because everybody was expecting it to be tight. Nobody knew who was going to win. Everybody knew that there was the possibility that either one could win. So we're still kind of in a phase of, all right, we'll see how this goes. We'll see what happens and what to expect. Regarding Ohio itself, there is kind of the idea that Ohio doesn't seem to be a swing state anymore. Like I said, in the past, it was Democratic one year, Republican another year, but at this point, it's been very consistently voting Republican. So it almost seems like, at least in this state, we might be headed towards an era of Ohio being a reliably Republican state for the foreseeable future.
I mean, that's a statement that you make, a big one, that, Ohio can be going forward a strong Republican state. Uh, with that, I would come to you, Kristen, because you have a huge experience in political campaigning. And when I was looking at your profile, I saw that you have also worked with the former President Barack Obama, and which is, I think, who would not like to work with him? So yeah, definitely amazing. So I want to know your experience and your expertise on how are you viewing the result of this particular election, uh, especially in terms of the past context, because we have seen that there has a lot happened in the past. And what do you think in terms of political campaigning, because you have experience in political campaigning, what do you think was different in this particular election cycle than the other two elections in which Trump was a part?
Yeah. For some context for the viewers, I indeed was part of the 2008 Obama campaign. I worked at the DNC headquarters, the Democratic National Party, at the national level in Washington, D.C. Because the campaign at that time was split in two parts. One part was based in Chicago, the former Obama campaign, and then the other part was based in Washington, D.C., the Democratic Party committee, basically. And we worked together at the time. And I got to see the inner workings of the campaign, like how it's run, how financing is done, how political messaging is done, how they were operating with surrogates that were planted everywhere in swing states to, talk to voters, because the candidate himself cannot be everywhere, of course. And I myself was based at the research department, which does rapid response and opposition research to figure out what kind of skeletons are in the closets of the opponent, John McCain at that time, and how to respond as fast as possible to whatever John McCain at that time said, if it was false. And that brings me to differences between then and now, because at that time, it was a campaign of hope and change, as everybody still remembers, even people who weren't there at the time. And messaging was positive, and it had to be fact-based. I remember that if we caught John McCain with some false statement, we would be like, oh, this is an opportunity to completely change the direction of the campaign, because lying or misrepresenting the truth or giving semi-false statements, that could make or break a campaign back in those days. That, of course, has completely changed. Facts don't really matter anymore. You can come with facts, but people don't really care. It's all about emotions. So you really have to tap into voters' emotions and not just provide facts, because it's not enough. And I think Trump has been absolutely brilliant in doing that. His messaging has always been fear-based. It's a fear-driven narrative where there's an enemy. The enemy can be the media, it can be immigrants, it can be the Democrats, it can be the enemy within, the civil servants that are part of the system. But it's always portraying a picture of an enemy, and that reaches people in their gut, basically. That's how you emotionally reach them. And you can think a lot of things about that. You can say it's a wrong thing to do, but it works. And Trump knows that. And if you combine that with all the misinformation and disinformation that's been growing and growing in the past few years, thanks to social media, that's a kind of toxic cocktail. Because if you use and emotion and disinformation, and you mix that together, then you can end up where we are right now. And the final thing that's definitely changed in the past years is that there's a global trend towards more conservatism, isolationism, authoritarian governments. I'm from the Netherlands. Here in the Netherlands, we see the exact same thing with the PVV, Party for Freedom here, which is similar to Trump's positions. And I think the responses that I saw this morning when the results came were exactly the same as they were in the Netherlands when the PVV won in a landslide victory here last year. That, the opponents of the PVV here said, it's crazy. Why do people vote for an autocrat? Why do they vote for somebody who keeps insulting groups of people, who puts minorities in a terrible position. So the reflexes were all, how could you possibly vote for a party or a person like that? They weren't reflective to their own campaign or whatever. It was all about, what have we done wrong to not win from somebody or a party like this? They cannot understand that these types of messages actually resonate with people, because decency as a basic feature is something that they expect to be center of the debate. And it is not. It is not what matters most to people. It is now about the economy, about people's own position, about opportunism. And all those things were different in 2008 and also in 2012. It was more about collective responsibility, collective action, giving people equal opportunities. But what you see is that when the swing goes to the left, it always goes back to the right at some point. And the question is just, how far does it go before it goes back again? And I think we're in a situation now with a Republican majority, a Republican president, probably a Republican House as well, that we will see a return to more traditional conservative values, and that can be that America can be stuck with for many years to come because of the majority they have in the Supreme Court, which is now 6-3 and could even go up to 7-2 under a new Trump presidency.
I mean, you have highlighted some of the very key points. And one of the main things that you highlighted and which I really liked was that it swings to the left, and then we have to see how far it goes, and then how far it comes to the right, and how far it goes. So I think that's a key sentence that I would be taking from what you have said, because we have seen that there was a time after Brexit, especially, that it started going right across the whole landscape mainly. And then it was like there was a resurgence we saw in Brazil, we saw in US, later things getting back. And then now we are again seeing that there is a turn. So it's definitely something that should be noted.
Yeah, and normally facts would matter in this. You know, it could be corrected by either facts with practical policies and with critical media knowledge, and all those things are being pushed away now, mainly through social media channels that allow for misinformation and disinformation to be spread so easily. And that really, really does something to people. I mean, I think the main factor for Trump has been that he's won a lot of young men's votes, much more than he got the young women votes. And I think there's a pretty big group of relatively young people that haven't experienced anything else than what we have now, which is that there are bubbles in which when you say something outrageous, you don't get, corrected for it, but you get 14,000 likes. And that's completely different from, let's say, only 4 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, in this particular election, we also saw that the effect of the traditional media was not that big on the elections than the non-traditional media or the podcast media that we have. So yeah, there was a complete shift on that particular scale also. So coming from that to, the things that have been changing and how the world has seen this particular election, because I saw that many world leaders, once Trump was on 266, they were very fast to congratulate him and everything. I think I saw Keir Starmer, and then I saw Macron and everyone coming and wishing him that congratulations, all the best. So Vaibhav, what do you think, like what is the world's view on this particular election? What do you think is the takeaway that the world is taking from here? Because we are seeing that the NATO is worried. We have seen that Macron called Olaf Scholz and he said that we will be talking about this and having a more sovereign Europe. That's the word that he used. And Ukraine is one thing which is in huge question. So what do you think is the world's view on this particular result?
Yeah, actually a really good question, because I was just coming to this. And even before coming to the worldview, I'll have to say that even when we started with this panel, we decided that we're gonna stop for 1 or 2 days to get the results. All the eyes were on Pennsylvania or some other state, and even the whole world was watching Pennsylvania at some point of time. That was us also. Even while preparing for this panel, I was like, okay, I have some points if Kamala wins this, if her campaigns get successful, or if Trump gets successful. But now they have made it easier for me, like just to pinpoint all the points that the Trump administration might have in the coming 1 or 2 weeks. So yeah, that is my take on it. As far as like a few key points, as far as Ukraine is concerned, I think President Zelensky will be one of the most worried person on the globe when it comes to right now, because he has been heavily relied on US support when it comes to either financial or the militaristic approach of it. Even in like the next few months, there was a lot of military logistics that was promised to him. I don't think that is going to be as smooth as he is expecting now. Trump has been very clear on his Ukraine agenda. He says he wants peace. He wants both the parties to talk it out. Zelensky is probably the last person on the planet who wants that, but I think the Trump campaign is very clear on that. And the other country which should be really worried right now is Iran, because Trump last administration, we know he was very clear on his stance on Iran, that they are the clear foe for US. But again, like the Middle East has been that one region where Trump has maintained relative peace. We saw him do wonders with when it comes to the Abraham Accords. But again, it's Donald Trump. You never know what is going to happen in that region. But the hopeful scenario for the whole world is for peace, at least in Europe and in Middle East, both of them. Like, because we remember even in the past two administrations, he went really toe to toe when it comes to like leaders with Kim Jong Un, and then one day he just went to South Korea, shook hands with him. So we really don't know what goes inside his campaign. But yeah, his stance on as far as Ukraine and Iran are concerned are very similar. Although the major redistribution or relocation of assets when it comes to the military aspect of it, I think it is going to be from Europe or Middle East to Asia Pacific, because I think a lot of US defense and military logistics are going to be focused on what is the development in China, or for example the South China Sea, because that is something that we have seen constant. As far as the broader US foreign policy is concerned, I think we have seen that with all the previous presidents as well, that it remains broadly the same. Some changes might be there, but yeah, again, Trump is the outlier. You can never call it, because we could never call him getting on a phone call with Kim Jong Un and deciding, okay, we'll maintain some level of peace. As far as the broader world is concerned, I think, as everybody here pointed out, Europe has to be the most stressed region in the world right now, because a lot of leaders there were expecting more push into the Ukraine war, but I think that will dwindle down slowly and slowly. So yeah, that's my overall on the 2, 3, or 4 major regions on the world. But yeah, again, as I said, it's Trump. You never know what his next tweet is going to be. So yeah.
Okay, but now tweet is X, so you don't know. There's even more, I mean, concern around that also by a particular blog. So yeah. Now, moving on from that, I think a lot of this also plays around the economics, like the global economics, and there are many people who are worried, mainly in Europe and China, that what will be Trump's economic policy or tariff policy. That is where I come to you, Dr. Adnan. uh, you are a person who is having a lot of expertise in political economy. What do you think will be the repercussions of this particular elections in terms of American relations economically with a lot of countries, especially Europe, China, India, all these countries?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very interesting conversation on a very important topic. Thank you for including me in this panel. I appreciate it. And I just, before I answer your question, I just want to touch base upon a few points very, very briefly. Kaitlyn mentioned about Ohio not being a swing state anymore. Same goes with Florida. Florida can no longer be considered as a swing state. We know what happened during Obama. We know what happened before Obama. We know what happened during Al Gore. Florida is no longer considered as a swing state. It has gone completely red. Another point that Mr. Singh has mentioned is about Europe being, Europe is right now, European leaders, they are on their edge. They are extremely nervous. What is going to happen? And the point that Kirsten mentioned about social media, fake news, we have seen the impact of that from X, which is formerly known as Twitter. And we have seen how excited Elon Musk became when he joined one of Trump's rallies. And he has been giving money to people to vote for Trump. So, you know, there are many complexity, there are many things to unfold, there are many things to consider. But when it comes to global economy, I would say, you know, reflecting, echoing what Mr. Singh said, that Indo-Pacific will be a huge concentration for America. I think Donald Trump sees that region very potential. If you connect that region with Australia, very young population, very driven, highly educated, he thinks that is the future. And if America wants to compete against China, he wants to have a very strong hold in Indo-Pacific. And you'll also see that when it comes to China, both the Republican and the Democrat, they're on the same page that, look, the bigger elephant in the room is China. We must do anything, everything possible in terms of economy, in terms of security, to make sure that we have a very strong hold in Indo-Pacific. And when it comes to Trump's second era, second term, second tenure as presidency, I think he will wreck British economy. He will also, again, it is too early to predict. We don't know. This is Trump. We don't know what may happen. But I do think that there is a serious matter to be taken into consideration. He may very well wreck British economy. He may very well wreck European economy. He has been saying for far too long that you know, America is the one who is providing all sort of security and assurance for Europe. Europe hasn't been investing enough for his own security. And he has also been saying that European, they want to sell their product in America, but if they really want to do so, they have to pay more tariff. According to Trump, from one of his recent rallies, he said, look, the most beautiful word in dictionary is not love, it's tariff. I love tariff. So if he introduces additional tariff for British product, if he introduces additional tariff for European product, I think this will have huge consequence on both British economy. It will have huge consequence on European economy as well. And in recent days, he was I think he had relatively good relationship with Boris Johnson, but I am not entirely convinced that he will have once again, it is Trump, very unpredictable. I am not completely convinced that he will have very smooth relationship with the current Labour administration in Britain. And we have seen in recent days that one of the key staffer from Labour Party, I think she wrote on her on her LinkedIn that she is trying to organize a group of volunteers from Labour Party to go to America to campaign for Kamala Harris. And Trump took it very negatively. His campaign took it very negatively. In fact, he raised serious concern about foreign interference in America's election, referring that LinkedIn post shared by one of the key staff members from the Labour Party. And we have seen in the past, current Foreign Secretary David Lammy, he said he used number of colorful adjectives to describe President Trump. Yes, we know in recent time they are also trying to ease up that relationship, but I'm not entirely convinced, considering Trump's character, considering Trump's personality, whether he will he will just say, look, let's forget about it. It is water under the bridge and let's move on. So once again, considering Trump's previous tenure, considering his personality, we have to observe it very keenly. But I am almost certain that it is not a very good news for Europe's economy. It is not a very good news for Europe's security. I think he will have a very good relationship with India. There is no doubt at all. Once again, look, India is a rising power. India's diaspora is very important for America's success. It is very, very important. So the people-to-people relationship between American people and Indian people will always remain very good. And it seems that he has a very good relationship with Prime Minister Modi. And I think this relationship may enhance even further. And if India's administration, if they're pragmatic and smart, they may use it for their economic benefit. So I think Trump presidency is not a very good news for Europe's economy. I think it may be, to a certain extent, Indo-Pacific may use it for their benefit if they are pragmatic, if they are smart. But considering Trump's character, considering his personality, his previous action, I do not see any rosy picture for Europe at this moment. But once again, we have to observe it very keenly.
Well, thank you so much, Adnan. There was a lot on the plate that you have put and a lot to discuss, definitely. But the main thing that we also need to concentrate on is the future of US politics and US elections. And that brings me to Kirsten. Kirsten, we have seen, and with almost all the panelists saying that the landscape of American politics has changed, and definitely after Trump's win, it has definitely changed after today's result. How much do you think the political landscape has evolved after these particular results? What is your output on that? And what do you think that we can take the key takeaways from this particular evolved landscape into the future? What is coming up for us in the future? Because it is very difficult to predict the future, but it is easy if we analyze it and give some of our analysis. So what do you think are your analysis on that?
Well, there were three main topics in this election. The economy, abortion rights, women's rights, and democracy itself. That's the thing that the Democrats were most concerned about, but also a lot of the Republican voters, interestingly enough. And with a Republican majority, the road is now paved to implement Project 2025. For those who haven't heard about it, it's a 900+ page blueprint for new conservative policies that was written by the Heritage Foundation, which is a conservative think tank. And at least 140 people from Trump's close circle, advisors, things like that, were involved in writing this Project 2025. He himself has said that he has nothing to do with it, that he doesn't know anything about it, which is obviously not true, but it doesn't matter because it's the Republican platform and this is what they want to implement. And part of that platform is at the core is a return to traditional conservative values, getting rid of woke, as they describe, but also reintroducing more Christian, evangelical norms, but also replacing 50,000 federal employees that are now working there based on their knowledge with party loyalists. And even worse than that, also replacing as many judges and other judicial appointees on all layers of government, from the local to the states to the federal level, with also party loyalists. So the big fear of the Democrats is that democracy itself will be at stake. And that's part of that global trend that I described earlier, this trend with a more populist anti-globalist movement that we've seen in many countries where autocrats come into power and civil rights are being put under pressure. And in the US, this is now basically starting. The foundation is already laid for it to be able to actually grow. But it's also something that we've seen worldwide. And you notice that in other countries, these types of movements that are already there, they look at the US and they think, good, it's working there as well. So we are getting bigger in our movement. And I think it's a potential threat for the rest of the world, because right now, with all the things that the US is doing wrong, it's still the bulwark against anti-democratic forces. If the US would completely move away from its geopolitical position as like the world's police, then what are we left with? Because then it's Russia and China that are controlling the rest of the world, because Europe is not strong enough. It's too fragmented. So basically then the anti-democratic forces that have been growing in the past years, that are led by both Russia and China, will gain more ground. And I think that's the biggest fear that most people have. And it would also put things under pressure, like climate change policies to counter climate change, because Trump, of course, wants to retreat from the Paris Climate Agreement. And I think apart from the day-to-day life that we all have, that's one of the biggest threats to humanity to begin with. So that'll be interesting to see how that evolves, because we don't have any time to lose there. But we definitely will under a new Trump presidency, or a Republican majority, I should say. It's a kind of a bleak outlook on the future, and it might not be as bad as we think, but government is a mammoth tanker. It's moving slow, and I think right now it's slowly moving in a wrong direction. And so it will have repercussions.
I mean, that's a very bleak picture for the future, but I hope somehow we will be having some checks and balances on the new administration. And I think that is something that is being talked about a lot, that now when the results have been out, it is basically in the hands of the American institutions and the American people that they make sure that there are checks and balances, which existed also during the first term. So that's something that we all should look forward to and hope for. I think Adnan had to make a point on this. So Adnan, if you can go ahead.
Sure. Thank you very much. Thank you. I completely agree with Christian that yes, the picture may seem very bleak, but I partially blame the liberal, the left and liberal, where we are right now. Think about, we are talking about democracy, rule of law. See what is the Biden's administration policy when it comes to Middle East. This war has been going on for more than a year now. Not only that, they also see people, say for example, since Great Depression, the working class people in America, in Europe, they see, when it comes to rules and regulation, when it comes to economic opportunity, it is one rule for Wall Street bankers, is another rule for workers from all those Rust Belt areas like Pennsylvania or Michigan, so on and so forth. The globalization is happening, and it will happen. That is the reality. If Britain, America, Europe thinks they will be able to shut their door completely on immigrants, I think they will be living in cloud cuckoo. There is no doubt at all. But also at the same time, people do not want open border. If there is open border, then it creates some sort of anxiety. It creates some sort of distrust on the system. Where we are right now, I think to a certain extent, I also blame the liberals, also the left, because they have taken the system, they have taken people for granted for far too long. If we go back to the cause of Brexit, you'll find that areas in Britain that have voted for Brexit, those are the areas where the government did not spend enough to create economic opportunity, to create transport link. London, south of England, voted to remain in European Union because those areas were heavily benefited. So when it comes to rules and regulation, economic opportunity, the work, I understand. Like many, I myself, I am also very, very frustrated with this result. But I think it is a time for us to reflect, review, and see whether we can do better in nearer future. Kamala Harris has raised £1 billion for her election campaign, which is record in the history of the United States. Still, she failed to translate that campaign fund for her advantage in key swing state. Her performance is worse than Hillary Clinton. Her performance is worse than Joe Biden, for sure. So I think it is important, instead of always blaming other side, it is also very, very important to understand what is happening, and then how we can come up with better policies. Say, for example, in Britain, nowadays we see this leveling up. Government is investing heavily in north of England, in east of England, to create those economic opportunity. The working class people see that, look, because of globalization, our jobs are moving abroad. The Wall Street bankers, city of London, they wrecked the economy. We had this great financial recession. No one went to jail. But when it comes to working class people, they say, please cut us some slack as well. Otherwise, we'll go for the orange man. We'll give this orange man another chance, right? So I think it is important for us to reflect that as well.
I mean, there's a lot of concern in certain sections, as you highlighted, that they have not benefited from capitalism or its benefits. But that is also something that the economists have to see and look at, and maybe the Democratic Party has to reflect within themselves. And that's something that I think after these results we need to look at. When it came to Ohio being one that is now hard Republican or hard red, I think Ohio was also kind of those particular states which is which was in an industrial belt, but then it didn't get full benefits of capitalism, and because of which we had seen that there is a huge shift. And even if we can see that these particular blue wall, so-called blue wall states, we have seen them becoming slowly and slowly, gradually, a lot of red votes coming out, mainly because of many people have left out from that economic development of America. And that's something that also shook me, because many people were saying that there's no inflation now, that the economy is doing good, and also the economist's headline that the envy of the world, the economy that is the envy of the world. But many people feeling that we are not doing good. The people at the lower sections, thinking that we are not doing good, contrary to the people in the Wall Street who are doing much better. So I think that needs to be looked at, answered about, and democratized in terms of that. But also a lot of important points taken up in terms of climate. That brings me to Shuva, who is one of our experts in climate, and she has been waiting since so long. I'm really sorry to keep you waiting for that long. What do you think are going to be now the future steps that will be taken by the next US administration, that is the Trump's US administration, especially when it comes to climate action or climate change? Because we saw one of the first things that Trump did when he came back, came to White House, was that he decided that he will go out of the Paris Treaty. That was a huge decision. Biden decided that he will come back, but we saw that a lot of people lost faith in the US governing system around these things. So what do you think about this particular thing?
Thanks, Harsh. I'm actually pretty glad to go last because it was absolutely fascinating to listen to the other colleagues. And, I want to go back to the first word that you asked. What is the one word to define? And my word would be definitive. That, a decision either way that has happened is a firm decision that has come from the people of America.
they've chosen for whatever reason, when you get a mandate, which is this sort of powerful, the policy certainty sort of becomes clear rather than a wavering thing. So when I come into this from a point of view of not politics, but policy, I think Americans have spoken and they've spoken in a firm, definitive voice. We may agree with it, we may disagree with it, but there is a mandate here. And if I want to kind of step back a little bit because there were many things said, and I want to bring that thread together for you on the multilateral aspect of this thing, right? And a lot of our media and the news and the analysis that we get from, I would say, the West or global North or whatever you call it, is from the lens of them looking outwards. I want to bring in a little bit about how the world sees the situation. And this world is not a homogeneous world, right? So when you say global South, developing countries, emerging markets, they're not similar countries. I mean, just in our neighborhood, we have Russia, China, and India, not similar. We have Indonesia, Malaysia, Brazil, Thailand, Vietnam, that block. We have the whole African continent, the Middle East, Brazil. These are very, very different countries with different relationships with each other and with America. So having a composite point of view, first of all, does not work. And one of the conversations that we've been having, and we work closely with our American counterparts and other countries, is an emphasis on strategic relationships, bilaterals, multilaterals, etc., than a one-size-fits-all global narrative. Because when we started the whole globalization thing that we're speaking of, it was kind of the hub and spoke model where the center of the world was America and its trade system, its financial mechanism, the dollar currency, the way they governed. They were the free world's leader, etc., etc. And everybody was in a spoke or satellites around that system, including Europe, which then is seen as a bloc rather than independent countries. But to just give an example how this works, even if you see India's relationship, we have a different relationship with EU than with, say, France or Germany or the member countries individually, Italy, etc. So the new way that countries interact with each other is not the old way. And when you take this in the context of the UN, COP, you just mentioned what happens with Paris Agreement, etc. Those things, to our mind, and we have research on this, that multilateralism has overall fallen through. And one of the questions we're asking is, do we even need the COP? What has the COP achieved? It's the 29th COP. I'm going to be in Baku next week. And there's already several discussions on, do we need the UN? Do we need COP? I mean, COP is a subset of the UN. What did Summit of the Future achieve? Right. So a lot of basic questions that were taken as dogma almost are now being completely questioned in the new context of geoeconomics. So while the Western data will not speak of, let's say, the alternate currency models being explored in the world, the dollar economy, the oil petrodollar, as we call it, is kind of coming across. We have bilateral currencies coming in. There are massive movements, the digitalization movement that is really escalating development in the global South, emerging markets, the supply chains that are happening between strategically aligned countries. You mentioned the Indo-Pacific. There's a lot of stuff going on in the Indo-Pacific beyond the military, because that's a trade route. So you have the trade route going from Russia. The Russian oil, for example, is coming via that route to India. The Malacca Strait has become very important. America's trying to get into the Bangladesh, the Bay of Bengal area. India's kind of moving into Chabahar port in the Iran side. We're looking at alternative pathways of trade, of movement of goods and services that weren't there in the traditional method. Who controls these pathways? Who's trading with whom? Who's bringing the regulations in? What we call the rules-based order of the world is very, very different even from 10 years ago. So when you then put America in the middle of this plot, do they still have the significance that they had in 1944, 45, 75, whatever, to really define the global culture, their traditions, their behaviors, their trade patterns? We don't think it is, because the data is not indicating that. So is the American election as important as it would have been earlier? No, it's not. And is the policy of Trump versus Biden versus Obama, etc., very different? No. All of them went into, in fact, Trump actually did not go into a war, if I see it from the outside. All his predecessors and have gone into wars with other countries. We've had the Afghanistan evacuation happening. We've had the whole Middle East situation again blow up. I'm not even touching Russia and Ukraine. What has happened, and I think Adnan spoke of that, the dependence, and Vaibhav also spoke of that, or the dependence of EU on America has made this a far more global issue in their eyes than it is for the world. And I think Mr. Jaishankar had said this very well, and he said that the Euro's problems are not our problems, and that's really true, because once you adopt a with us or against us position, then you are, as you saw, the sanctions against Russia fail, because people at this point no longer have that obligation to really toe that line, because there are other alternatives to trade. If you have the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, which is billed as this great American bill, etc. But from our point of view, it's a protectionist measure. It's something that is like a black hole that has sucked out clean energy investment from all across the developing countries, because it's a more lucrative thing. There are SOPs being given to that. Indian small manufacturers, solar, etc., have invested more than $2 billion through IRA in the US, which means we have lost $2 billion that was meant for our green energy transition. And this is the way CBAM, if it comes in from the EU, the Clean Border Adjustment Mechanism, these are unilateral laws and measures that these countries are passing. Then they expect the rest of the world to comply with such things. That is not where the story is going. The geoeconomics are not going in that direction. That said, where does America have advantages, right? And in the clean energy, in the climate change, and I know we don't see Trump as the messiah of all these things, far from it, but Trump or America overall, the best term that comes up is a transactional country. It's a business-led country. So it kind of looks at where it can make money for itself, but that is not necessarily a bad thing for other countries. So if we're looking at battery technologies, if we're looking at critical mineral supplies, if we're looking at new innovations in doing things, America does have a technological edge in doing that. So we can engage even with the Trump administration, and we are engaging. And I think Adnan mentioned that India has a good relationship. It's been a lot of hard work to get India's relationship up from our sanctions, etc., back in the day. But one of our positions has been, for example, that we are not China plus one. We have nothing to do with that. It cannot be that you replace China with an India and we start making the same things that you need as your back office. And then it's not China and it's not India, then you go to Vietnam and you start doing that game, because that's not strategic for us. So we have been very clear in our communication with our US counterparts on that. So then what we have, then we get into actual business. So we have the Quad, we have the IPEF, we have the G20, we have many forums now that are not UN forums, which are very, very sharply pointed. So at the G20 India last year, for example, and that's something my organization did with the government, we had a unanimous leaders declaration that had US, China, Russia, the EU, the Saudi Arabia, and all other countries, and we added the African Union to the G20. So many, many interesting things are up. And where the climate story goes, if we look at a binary of oil, phasing out oil versus reducing emissions versus decarbonizing using technology, bringing in future tech like CCUS, carbon capture, or other things, we really have to see where we kind of get stuck in our own narrative over there, right? I mean, is it only like even India, for example, we will prioritize our energy security over decarbonization. It's a stated position because energy security comes before going green. But can we do both? And that is where our next focus needs to be. And this is something that is politics agnostic. There is a business story here, there's a scientific story here, there's a diaspora collaboration possible. The whole global south can have neutral transactions based on this. But again, I would say, just to close this, that, and this is something again that we discuss with all our country counterparts, is that if you're going to ideologically change your relationships with other countries, then we cannot have a long-term strategic relationship, because every time your government changes, everything is expected to change. And that cannot be the way of engaging either between US India or US China or Russia India or any of those people. So you have to have politics agnostic relationships.
I mean, you have almost covered everything, and that basically makes me very happy, because it will be a very insightful conversation that our viewers will listen to, and young people will get to know a lot. One thing you touched on was that uh, it is a very important election in the eyes of Europe, because it matters to Europe the most. And that's I think that's the line that I would definitely take tonight with me, because uh, definitely it is an election that matters more to Europe than it does to other countries. And the data does say that a lot of other countries are doing things that really, that are really independent of only the American platforms. So yes, the world has come up a long way, and I'm thankful to you that you have brought this particular angle also in the conversation, where we are discussing US elections, because US elections have always been the main apple of the eye of every single election. But this particular point that you have mentioned brings into conversation that while they are important, they might not be that important at this particular time. So, but that is something that we need to look at, and let's see what time has for us in terms of that particular thing. Moving on from there to Kaitlyn again. So Kaitlyn, you are yourself a young person living in America, and there has been a lot of turnout of young voters this time, mainly because America has become very polarized, and we have seen that from both the sides, be it the Republicans and be it the Democrats. There's a huge turnout of young voters. What do you think got out the young voters this time, also in good numbers, if you see it through the image of Trump? So what do you think has changed? Where's the landscape going in terms of young voters? What is influencing them? Social media, non-traditional media? What all do you have in your mind?
Yeah, so you brought up a lot of points, polarization, youth, what's motivating the youth to come out, what the youth were doing this time. I think one of the most interesting and ironic statistics that I saw throughout this election in the past 24 plus hours was the fact that this year, ironically, Harris had a lot of trouble reaching the youth. Compared to, I'm pulling up the statistics now, because compared to the 2020 election, it was oh gosh, I'm looking for the statistics. I completely lost them. I'm sorry. But in 2020, it was 65.5% of voters between the ages of 18 and 30 that voted for Biden. While in this election, according to the current calculations and the counting, it was only 54.4% of voters that voted for Harris. And I think a lot of that was the influence of social media, not necessarily the campaigning of either one of the candidates, because if you look at the amount of money that both the candidates put into social media campaigning and in campaigning in the swing states, especially Pennsylvania, Harris invested much more intensively into campaigning on social media. We're talking about between July 21st and October 30th, Harris invested $113 million versus Trump's $17 million. So there's a huge difference. And yet somehow they did not manage to get to reach out to the youth, the Democrats, at least in this case. And there could be plenty of reasons for this. I'm just going to speculate. A part of it might just be delusion with the Democratic Party, like we were talking about up until this time. I believe it was Kirsten that spoke about the fact that some people who are voting for the first or second time in this election just don't know anything different at this point, And so they sort of have followed in that line of voting for the candidate that appeals mostly to their emotions. And another, I think this is just a speculation or a hypothesis of mine that could be tested, is the fact that, first of all, obviously, Harris had much more limited time to campaign. And so that's a part of the reason that in that given time period, she invested so much more than Trump did in social media campaigning, and in doing so, reaching out to the youth. But also, it seems like besides the temporal fact, besides the fact that Trump just simply had more time, there may have just been more organic support for Trump via social media. That could come from, we've talked about already, the idea of foreign influence in the in the elections, right? So it could have come from foreign influence. It could have come just simply from people within the United States who took it upon themselves to campaign for Trump intensively over these past 4 years in order to reach the youth through social media. And when we come to the point of polarization, I think, something that's really interesting for me, and the idea that there's a lot of people voting in these elections for the first or second times in their lives, and they don't know any other reality besides the polarized reality that we have. If you look at the polarization indices that are out there, the 4 most polarized countries in the world at the moment are South Africa, the US, Sweden, and Spain. But the difference between the polarization that's in the US and the polarization that's in Sweden and Spain, for example, is the fact that whereas Sweden and Spain are more politically polarized, let's put it like from the point of legislation, right? So the policies of the right and the policies of the left are here on the political spectrum. The US is more polarized from an emotional standpoint. So maybe the right and the left are actually here on the political spectrum, but they see the other side in any case as being mostly extremists. And I almost don't even know what I prefer in that case, because if there's this emotional polarization, obviously it could drive people to do many things for their own political perspectives, or for what they consider to be their values, So I don't know. I remember when I was preparing my answers to these sort of questions and brainstorming what could be the solution for this. I think, first of all, people need to practice, there's this empathy. Since it's so emotionally driven, there needs to be this sort of focus on tactical empathy, not necessarily saying that the way you feel is the way that I feel, but I recognize how you feel, and we're able to talk about that. I think that's an important aspect. Another thing is, I was talking about the way that America's social structure is right now and how my perspective of reality could be very different from someone else's perspective of reality. And I think that is due to the fact that in the past, America usually used to have more or less 3 levels of socialization or community. It was the family, then the church, and then the state. At this point, America's more divided into 2 types of communities, which is just the family and the state. And there's an intermediary community missing there. And so if there was a way for Americans to just participate more in community life, not necessarily within their community or not necessarily having to do with outright patriotism or loyalty to the state, but just participating in community life in whatever way they could, that could help to start to deal with, or I don't want to say deal with, but help people realize that the polarization is less based on what their actual view of policy is, and more based on the way that they're viewing the other in a certain sense. So it's a big conglomerate of ideas, but that's how I see the matter of polarization, youth voting, and social media at the moment.
I mean, you have picked up a very important point by saying that there is something that is very important called community. And it is very important, I think, not only for America, but globally. I think it is very important that all of us also understand the importance of community, especially in this age of social media, where we are more behind the screen and like we are right now. But that's an obligation because many of you are very far away from us right now. But the main issue is that the screen has created a big divide that I think is not very visible, and people are spending less time together in person, or even if they are spending time together in person, it's mainly along with the screens. So I think that has increased polarization because you have a lot of information available on internet. You do not know what kind of information is right, what is wrong. So I mean, that is like a flood of information that people are right now consuming.
Yeah. If I can just add one more thing, I think especially from the point of view of global affairs and geopolitics, a lot of nuance is lost among the younger generations in the US. The younger generations in the US, for example, don't really have, I don't see that they have a full comprehension of the fact that the US is despite whatever the administration would have been, the US would have continued to turn towards the Indo-Pacific area, you know. A lot of them don't really have that comprehension or the knowledge of that fact. And unfortunately, a lot of the nuance is lost on social media just because nuance is not good for emotionally motivating people.
I mean, you have again picked up one more important point, and I think these particular factors matter a lot. And I think they will be some of the key defining factors going ahead for polarization, or how far ahead the polarized aspect go. That also brings me again to one more topic which is very polarizing, that is climate, and again brings me to Shua, who is again the expert on this particular matter. Uh, what do you think should the countries, mainly the global emerging economies, do to kind of get consensus on climate action by bypassing the US in certain ways, because US is not a reliable climate action partner right now? uh, how they can how they can create alliances to go to this particular aspect, especially after the election, because we know that now there will be a lot of uncertainty. And you highlighted a lot of things in your previous answer, where you said a lot of things are already happening apart from the American position. So what do you think can happen in these particular areas?
So I just want to qualify that I would not take the position, irrespective of politics, that you cannot engage with the US on climate under Trump, because the definition of climate is not a very narrow definition, right? Like I said, if we're looking at sustainable cooling in the Indo-Pacific, and that's a project that when Modi went to Delaware in September, and this BRICS summit took place, in fact, in Biden's house in Wilmington, instead of being in India, sustainable cooling was entered into the Quad, sorry, not BRICS, the Quad declaration. And there is something where India has an interest in cooling technologies for not just foods, but our people, because we lose a lot of GDP, mostly in the global. So if you take Africa, it's hot and humid. You take the Southeast Asia, it's all there. So now there is somewhere where, let's say, a Quad, which is Japan, which has huge cooling technologies, is invested in that. They have the manufacturing capacity. Australia is a part of that. India has the market for this, and US has the tech. Now, something like cooling, which is sustainable cooling, right? So we have the HFC, the Montreal Protocol, etc., with the ozone layer. If you know, I mean, a couple of decades ago, we came to those agreements, and then we phased out HFCs, or the freon gases, etc. Climate action also relates to this sort of thing. So it is not just fossil fuel, oil and gas extraction, etc., right? So our cooling footprint is going to be so much emission, and it's going to be such a heat feedback chain, that we really need technology at this point to make sure that 1.5 billion Indians and other people, around 4-5 billion people, are not overheating by 2035. So climate action itself is not a very narrow topic, so it's very large. So that is one part. So I would not rule out the US, because if you're making batteries and they have come up with some technology, Australia can come up with some technology. So it's not a door has shut. So I want to make that very clear. The other way that countries are already aligning is, like I said, with new supply chains and new trade routes and new bilateral or multilateral agreements based on who has what. So at CEEW, we do what is called a string of pearls, which is on a straight line. We sort of map circles on a country's capacities or potential to secure something in a value chain. And then we see which are the countries it can ally with who can complete the string of pearls. So at the end of the day, you are supposed to have all holes filled, like all the pearls should be solid. So if you see the Quad, for example, Australia, Japan, India, and the US, even between us, the lithium value chain is not a complete string of pearls. And I'm not just saying where the lithium is. Where are your ships, where are your containers, where are your ports, who's handling this, what's the extraction technology, what is the green footprint remover? There are many things going on over here. So I really want to give the message to everybody young who's watching this, is that the innovation and invention and the R&D, these are not political topics. And these are things on which we have now started doing what is called South-South cooperation. You would have heard that phrase oft used. But again, here we have 3-4 challenges if you're doing it outside the Western civilization construct, I will say, because IP laws come into it. So unless you match their IP, you are not legitimized. So our ancient knowledge, our traditional practices are not given credence. So what happens with something like that is you can't get funding then from a World Bank or any of their ratings agencies. So that's a Fitch or a Moody or Standard & Poor, you'll not get the credit rating. So your cost of borrowing will be higher. So, there are obstacles to this multilateral process that we constantly face unless we take one of the US or Australia or the EU as our partners in these ventures. So what we are now working on is first of all gathering, and this, see, because we cannot progress because you'll get stuck at these sort of points, right? Because you'll need to raise the funds. Funds are coming from Western donors or Western investors because the Global South doesn't have the monetary capacity to invest. BRICS Bank, NDB, we're trying to get the thing up. We're trying to expand the scope of multilateral development banks that are investing in the Global South. We're trying to get some data on the capacities of each country. So if you know, India set up the International Solar Alliance, for example, which has a whole lot of developing countries into which India and France co-founded that. And that now has 119 countries, which has the and European countries as well now. We have the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. Again, very important because 70% of infrastructure in the developing world has yet to be built. We have climate risk going up, so your infrastructure is at risk, your communities are at risk, insurance is very expensive. Again, goes back to cost of funds. So, when you look at all of these things, I would not suggest, I think Trump, 4 years of Trump is a very small time period in the scale of things that we're talking about. So taking a position that all is lost, we can't do anything, I would not encourage that at all. I mean, America is really, really resourceful country, and I would really like my American counterparts to not feel, sort of this bleakness that's come over it, because that's not what has happened to it. Individual institutions are intact, their research capacity is intact, their finances are not very strong. It's macroeconomically not doing so well. I don't know how much it's told to those countries because it's heavily indebted. So it's not a really strong economy at this point, and especially if an alternate to the dollar comes up in the next few years, there's serious risk to the US economy at a macro level. So those are things that they need to attend to. Their political opinion is obviously very divided, but the crux of it, what made America great, so to sort of take the slogan of this thing, is the capacity to innovate and kind of find ways around this. And I think India, at least, um, we don't write off the US at all. We don't think that we cannot cut a deal with Trump. We are in conversation with their people. There are many, many long-term projects. The only thing that we are think to it, and with any other developing country, is we need a 25 to 30-year horizon to invest in anything. Anything is a quarter century investment. So any country, developed or without, has to come in with a commitment that we are not going to disrupt this relationship on a whim, just whenever we feel like it. So that is the crux of any strategic relationship.
Definitely. I mean, you cannot do without US many things because like it's one of the world's most technologically advanced nations, and it has done things that others are not able to do. And one of the things that also brings a lot of entrepreneurial power or know-how to US is the that it is in the end the land of the free and innovative people. So innovation is something that is respected there. The entrepreneurial and business culture is something that is also respected in the US. Now we will be coming up to the end of the panel, in which we would be keeping up the floor for the panelists to have some questions for each other. If you have, you can definitely address the person that you want to after unmuting yourself. I think you can first raise up your hand and I can recognize you and then address to the other panelist if you have any question. If not, we definitely understand, but yes. Yeah, Shuva, please go ahead.
So I have a question for Kaitlyn because she's coming from inside out and I'm going inside. If I had to ask her, because she said that the youth are lacking a bit of nuance on geopolitics and all that, what would, Kaitlyn, you expect the administration to do to sort of fix this so the American youth are more informed on the nuances of what's happening outside the US borders?
That's a big question you're asking me, how to solve this problem. I mean, I think the only thing that anyone can do, which, you know, usually any sort of government administration is going to give communiques or is going to educate in line with the strategic interests of that government or that administration, right? I mean, the only thing that I think can be done is through internal public diplomacy, right? Through actual education initiatives, through investing in educating about the nuances. However, I find it to be difficult because nuance also isn't always 100% in line with the strategic interests of any administration anywhere. So it's a tough question. You know, there are solutions. However, is it really in the interests of any administration? Not just because we're talking about the Trump administration and the Trump administration's strategic interests. But I mean, is it in the interest of any government to fully talk about the nuances if it's not 100% in line with their platform and ultimately the way that they want their geostrategy to go in the world? So it's a funny question with a funny
I
answer.
love the nuance that you brought to the question. I love that. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, thanks for your question.
Well, that definitely was a nice conversation to pick up with in terms of the second part of our panel.
But I have a question also for Dr. Pavel in the meantime, if I can, while she's writing the question. Okay. I was wondering, so you talked a little bit about the economy and the effects of the Trump administration, the potential effects of the Trump administration on the economy, and what the effects of tariffs will be. But I'm also interested in what the potential effects of like not tariffs, but the potential effects of speculation and the sort of self-fulfilling prophecy of things. How, like what we've already been seeing in economic terms after the results have come out.
Very interesting point. I think with Trump's presidency, we can only just speculate. It's very difficult to actually say conclusively what may happen. You know, it is said in Britain today that Prime Minister Keir Starmer, he will need to check his mobile phone at the middle of night to see if Trump has tweeted something or not. Based on that, you have to take it forward. But I just want to make a final point, if I'm allowed to. Reflecting on what Shuva said previously, I could not agree more on your point. What is Europe's problem is a problem for the rest of the world. It is a very far-fetched idea, and I think the rest of the world is not buying it. You know, before the great financial recession, Eurozone was as big as America's economy. In 2024, America's economy is twice than Eurozone. Yes, America is no longer the singular hegemon. We live in multipolar world. However, America is a lethal force in terms of military. America is a huge economic superpower. There is no doubt at all about that. So I think all those countries, those who are interested of doing business with America, they're rather trying to make a relationship with America based on strategy, not based on some sort of emotional connection with this administration to that administration. I think most of the countries, they're coming into their sense that, look, we must look after our strategic interest, which Europe wasn't doing for far too long. So Europe has been relying disproportionately on America for its security aspect, for its economic aspect, and it wants the rest of the world to be concerned about Trump's presidency. And I would also say, reflecting on Shuva's point, that, look, this is not the end of the world. Considering 4 years, when it comes to grand scheme of things, it is a very tiny amount of time. Just because Trump has said horrible things in the past, he has used all sort of colorful adjective, that doesn't necessarily mean we won't be able to engage with him. That doesn't necessarily mean we won't be able to talk with him. We won't be able to consult with him, and we won't be able to make some sort of sensible, grown-up partnership with United States. 4 years is a short term, and I think to a certain extent, the power of presidency is somehow exaggerated in global politics. U.S. president has limited power. You have Supreme Court. It is one of the branches, one of the three branches of government. You have Congress, the legislative branch. You also have Supreme Court. So yes, U.S. president perhaps arguably the most powerful man. However, you also have other branches of government as well. We must remind ourselves about that too. And yes, it is, once again, may I just re-emphasize that it is not a very comfortable day. It is not a very good outcome for Europe. However, for far too long, Europe hasn't been investing enough on its security. It has been investing enough in terms of bringing people together. And going back to my previous point regarding globalization and what sort of changes happening all around the world, a major portion of our population that do not see globalization doing any good for them. How we can bring them, before giving any colorful name to President Trump, whether his presidency means doomsday for rest of the world, whether he is a fascist, so on and so forth. I think it is important for us to understand why the presidency of Trump, after investing so much money by Harris campaign, why President Trump got reelected, why orange has become the new black. We have to understand that the man, it is said that Trump, every time Trump used to shake his hand with anyone from outside of Trump Tower, he used to sanitize his hand. Why suddenly that man has become champion of working class people? I think we must do our, in Britain and in Europe, it calls MOT. You have to do your MOT to your car after a certain period of time to think, to see whether everything is in the right place. I think we need to do that. And when it comes to climate change, yes, in the past, President Trump has distanced his country from Paris Accord. However, the definition of climate change, it is a broad term, as Shuva mentioned previously. There are so many things that we can talk and discuss. Just because we have President Donald Trump, that doesn't necessarily mean this is the end of the world. 4 years is a very short term if we consider grand scheme of things. We must engage. And the point that you mentioned, Kaitlyn, is that, yes, there are so many elements in our society when it comes to division, polarization, but we must respect each other. We may fundamentally disagree with each other when it comes to bigger politics, but we must treat each other with respect. We must not say each other garbage and all sort of colorful name. I don't think that helps at all. I mean, just because a big chunk of people that support President Trump, that doesn't necessarily mean they're uneducated. That doesn't necessarily mean you can just ignore them. Yes, it is said in Britain that just because you are powerful in London, just because you own an election in London, that doesn't necessarily mean you'll end up in 10 Downing Street. Just because you own election in New York or in California, that doesn't necessarily mean you'll end up in White House. So we must reflect that. And another interesting point that you mentioned about young people, you see all those protests that has been happening for a long time in college campuses, university campuses. Those protests were particularly led by young people. But you see DNC conference, there was no reflection of that. You see Kamala Harris, there is no reflection of that. For far too long, I think liberal left political parties, they have taken ethnic minorities, they have taken certain groups for granted. And I think before name calling, before saying it is doomsday because of Trump's presidency, we must come up with better policy to address all those issues.
I mean, great points highlighted by all of you. And definitely we should end this particular conversation, this particular panel with the word hope. And hope not only because these elections have been in a certain way. But hope, because hope is on what humanity is. So, and we need to move forward from here for a better future for all the countries, for the better future for climate action, for a better future for geopolitics. Now, I don't know what a better future for geopolitics looks like, but a better future basically for every single thing. And that's what we need to do. And that basically brings me to the end. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining today. And thank you so much for giving your inputs. It was personally very knowledgeable conversation, and it was personally something that was very nice for me. Also, I got to know a lot, especially from all of you. It was something that had, uh, you know, a very big light to it in terms of knowledge, output, and input. So, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you to all the panelists today who have joined us. Thank you for giving us your time. Time is of value, and we always value people who give us time. So, thank you so much.